The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Leonard Hayes, 69 years old, sat at the defendant's bench, his trembling hands clutching the handcuffs that cut into his thin wrists. His amputated leg was hidden beneath a pair of old, torn pants, and his tired eyes were fixed on the cold marble floor. Judge Ethan Morley held the papers firmly, but his hands began to shake as he read the defendant's full name out loud. Leonard James Hayes, retired sergeant of the United States Army. Suddenly, the judge's face went pale. His eyes locked onto the man before him, searching for something familiar in the face weathered by life on the streets. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the memory struck him. That wasn't just another homeless man. That was the man who had saved his life 20 years ago, in a remote province of Afghanistan. But how did we get here? How does a war hero end up as a starving defendant in a Bronx courtroom? 3 weeks earlier, the morning sun barely broke through the gray haze that hovered over Hunts Point in the South Bronx. It was a neighborhood the city had chosen to forget, a place where dreams went to die and where invisible people struggled to survive one more day. Leonard Hayes woke up the way he had every morning for the past 6 years, in pain. Phantom pain in his amputated leg, aching from sleeping on concrete, and a deeper pain in his chest that came from a heart crushed by the world's indifference. He slowly rose from his corner near the Bruckner station, where he had spent another cold October night. His home was a small space wedged between two abandoned buildings, shielded only by scraps of cardboard and a worn-out blue tarp he had found months ago. Everything he owned was there. A faded military backpack, a few pieces of clothing, a yellowed photo of his old battalion brothers, and his military ID, the only reminders that he had once been someone of worth. Leonard limped through the streets with the help of a makeshift cane carved from a piece of wood he had polished himself. His gray hair was disheveled, his unshaven face hid scars that told stories no one cared to hear. The old military coat he wore was so stained and worn that few would recognize the once bright symbols of honor that adorned his shoulders. People passed him like he was part of the city's background noise. Mothers pulled their children aside, businessmen looked away, teenagers made cruel jokes. To them, Leonard was just another crazy homeless guy, another problem society didn't want to face, but Leonard knew who he was. Even when hunger gnawed at his stomach and loneliness hollowed out his soul, he remembered the days when he wore his uniform with pride. He remembered missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, the brothers he protected, the lives he saved. He especially remembered a young, blue-eyed military doctor he had dragged from a burning vehicle during an ambush in 2004. That particular morning, Leonard was especially weak. He hadn't had a decent meal in 3 days. His last $5 had gone toward diabetes medication from the local pharmacy, pills that cost a small fortune but were essential to keep him alive. The corner grocery store was small and familiar. Mr. Patel, the Indian owner, always treated him with distant kindness, but never cruelty. Leonard had bought food there many times when he managed to gather spare change or when someone handed him a coin. That day, Leonard walked in and moved slowly through the narrow aisles. His hungry eyes scanned the shelves. Fresh bread, bright fruits, pre-made sandwiches in the fridge. His stomach growled loudly, a cruel reminder that he was still just a man with basic needs, no matter the heroic past. Then he saw it, the tuna sandwich. Small, simple, only $3.50. To most, it was a cheap snack. To Leonard, it was a meal that could carry him through the day. He looked around. Mr. Patel was busy with another customer. The store was otherwise empty, except for a woman browsing cereal at the back. Leonard grabbed the sandwich, tucked it quietly under his coat, and started toward the door. But the store's security system had caught everything. The cameras recorded every movement. Mr. Patel, trained by years of petty thefts, sensed something off and kept an eye on Leonard. "Hey, stop right there!" Mr. Patel shouted as Leonard reached the door. Leonard froze. His veteran's heart, the same heart that had withstood bombings and firefights, pounded as if he were back in combat. He knew he'd been caught. He knew he had crossed a line he had sworn never to cross. "Please," Leonard murmured, his voice raspy and breaking. I'm just really hungry." But Mr. Patel had already called the police. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. The officers, young and impatient, saw just another homeless man causing trouble. They didn't see the decorated veteran. They didn't see the man who had risked everything for his country. They saw only Leonard Hayes, 69 years old, no fixed address, suspected of petty theft. The cuffs clicked around his wrists with a sound that echoed like gunfire in his mind. Leonard was placed in the back of the squad car, his cane confiscated, his dignity shattered. As the car pulled away, he caught a glimpse through the window. People on the street stopping to watch the scene unfold. Another bum getting hauled off. No one knew they were arresting a hero. No one knew that this man had saved lives, served his country with honor, and sacrificed everything for others. To the world, Leonard Hayes was just another criminal being taken exactly where he belonged. The irony was cruel. The man who once protected others now needed protection. The man who had fed wounded comrades in war zones was now stealing food just to survive. The man once honored for bravery was now being humiliated by desperation. At the precinct, Leonard was processed like any common criminal. Fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of his few belongings. He spent the night in a cold, damp cell, surrounded by other men broken by life. But fate had other plans for Leonard Hayes. In 3 weeks, he would stand before Judge Ethan Morley, the same young medic whose life he had saved 2 decades earlier. And in that moment, everything would change. If this powerful story of a forgotten hero moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep bringing stories like this to life. Judge Ethan Morley had presided over hundreds of cases in his 15 years on the bench. Minor thefts, especially involving homeless individuals, were routine in his courtroom in the Bronx. Typically, he processed these cases swiftly. A fine, a few days of community service, maybe a brief stay in a shelter. That November morning, Ethan arrived at court following his usual routine. Black coffee, a quick review of the day's docket, a few minutes of meditation before putting on his robe. At 45, he was known for his efficiency, and quietly, for his compassion. When Leonard was brought into the courtroom, handcuffed and visibly limping, Ethan barely looked up from the paperwork. Just another petty theft case. Item value, $3.50. State versus Leonard James Hayes, the clerk announced. Ethan began reading the case file automatically. The defendant is charged with shoplifting merchandise valued at $3.50. But then something in the personal information made him stop cold. It read, Leonard James Hayes, 69 years old, retired sergeant of the United States Army, combat veteran, Iraq and Afghanistan. The name echoed in his mind like a distant bell. Leonard James Hayes. Where had he heard that name before? Ethan lifted his eyes and really looked at the man before him for the first time. Disheveled gray hair, unshaven, a gaunt face worn down by life on the streets. But something in those eyes, something, struck a chord. Sergeant Hayes, Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. Did you serve in Kunar province? Leonard raised his head, surprised to hear his rank spoken with respect. Yes, sir. 3rd Battalion, 187th Airborne Infantry. Ethan's heart started racing. The memories rushed back like a flood breaking through a dam. Kunar Province, Afghanistan, August 15th, 2004. The young military medic Ethan Morley, then 25 years old, was on his 3rd patrol mission. It was his 3rd month in country, still adjusting to the constant fear of enemy territory. Sergeant Leonard Hayes, a seasoned and respected 49-year-old, was leading the patrol. Doc, stay close to the vehicle, Leonard had told him that morning. These mountains can be tricky. The ambush came out of nowhere. One moment they were driving through a narrow pass. The next, the world erupted in gunfire and shrapnel. The first IED hit the lead truck. The second struck the vehicle carrying Ethan and Leonard. Ethan regained consciousness inside the overturned Humvee, which had caught fire. His legs were trapped beneath twisted metal. Smoke filled his lungs. The fire was closing in fast. That's when he saw Leonard. The sergeant had been thrown clear by the blast and was clearly injured, blood streaming from several wounds, visibly limping. But instead of seeking cover, Leonard ran straight for the burning vehicle. "Hang in there, Doc!" Leonard shouted. "I'm getting you out!" Ignoring the flames, the bullets, and his own wounds, Leonard dove into the wreckage. With superhuman strength, he managed to lift the mangled steel pinning Ethan down. Shards of glass sliced his hands, flames scorched his back, but he didn't stop. "Come on, move!" Leonard yelled, dragging Ethan out. They had barely cleared the wreck when the fuel tank exploded, sending a fireball into the sky. Had Leonard hesitated even 10 more seconds, they would have both died. But Leonard didn't stop. Even injured and burned, he carried Ethan on his back for nearly 200 meters to a secure location, shielding him with his own body. "You're gonna be all right, Doc," Leonard had whispered, applying pressure to Ethan's wounds. "Just hold on a little longer." When the helicopters arrived, Leonard refused treatment until he was sure Ethan was safe. That was the last time Ethan had seen Sergeant Leonard Hayes. Back in the courtroom, the memories surged like a tidal wave. Ethan looked again at the man before him and saw the same eyes that had once looked at him with courage and compassion 20 years ago. "Oh my God," Ethan murmured. "Sergeant Leonard Hayes, you saved my life." Leonard studied the judge's face carefully. Slowly, recognition began to form. "Doc Morley? Ethan Morley? That young medic from Boston?" "Yes," Ethan replied, tears forming in his eyes. "That's me, Sergeant. You saved my life that day." The courtroom was completely silent. Leonard straightened his back as much as the handcuffs allowed. For a moment, the broken man vanished, and in his place stood the proud soldier. "Just doing my job, Doc," Leonard said. "A soldier never leaves another soldier behind." Ethan closed his eyes, struggling to contain his emotions. For 20 years, he had searched for Leonard Hayes, wanting to say thank you, to repay the debt. And now he was here, not as the hero he remembered, but as a starving defendant. "Sergeant," Ethan said softly, "I need to understand how you ended up here, how the man who saved my life ended up on the streets." Leonard gave a bitter smile. "It's a long story, Doc, one the system never really cared to hear." "I'm postponing this hearing," Ethan declared, "and I'm going to make sure you have proper legal representation, Sergeant Hayes. After everything you've done for this country, for me, that's the least I can do." For the first time in years, something close to hope flickered in Leonard's eyes. The postponement of the hearing sent ripples through the judicial system. It wasn't common for a judge to pause a petty theft case in order to request a full investigation into a defendant's background. But Ethan Morley was determined to uncover how his rescuer had ended up in such a desperate situation. Ethan assigned Sarah Martinez, an experienced public defender, to represent Leonard. When he personally shared the story of being rescued in Afghanistan, Sarah knew immediately this case wasn't like the others. "I want you to look into every single document tied to Sergeant Hayes' benefits," Ethan told her. "A decorated veteran doesn't just vanish from the system without a reason." Sarah began with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Leonard's records were buried deep under layers of red tape, but what she found left her furious. Leonard had served honorably for 22 years. His commendations included 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and several citations for bravery. He had retired on medical grounds in 2006 due to war injuries that ultimately led to his amputation. His benefits included disability pension, medical care, and subsidized housing, a package meant to ensure he would never be left in need. But in 2018, everything came to a sudden halt. The cause? A letter. A single letter sent to an address where Leonard hadn't lived in 3 years. It was a routine request for a disability status verification. A check-in required every 5 years. Leonard never received it. At the time, he was spiraling after the death of his wife, Margaret, in 2015. She had been his emotional anchor since the war. When she died of cancer, Leonard fell into a deep depression. First, he lost their apartment in Queens when he could no longer afford the rent on his own. He moved into a small room in the Bronx. As his diabetes worsened and he could no longer work, he ended up in a temporary shelter. It was during these transitions that the critical VA letter was sent to his old address. The new tenant simply tossed it out, sealing the fate of a war hero. When Leonard failed to appear for the mandatory appointment, the system automatically terminated all his benefits. No human ever reviewed the case. A computer flagged his account as inactive and rerouted the benefits back into the general fund. Sarah discovered that Leonard had tried to fix it. Records showed dozens of calls made to the VA between 2018 and 2019. But every time, he was transferred to another department, placed on hold for hours, or told he needed documents he no longer had access to. The irony was cruel. The man who had risked his life for others was being defeated by paperwork and bureaucracy. While Sarah dug deeper, Ethan reached out to other veterans who had served alongside Leonard. Through military records, he found Colonel Raymond Stokes, who had once served as a young lieutenant under Leonard's command. "Leonard Hayes?" Raymond said when Ethan called. "My God, that man taught me everything I know about leading in combat. He saved my life at least 3 times in Iraq. Why are you asking about him?" When Ethan explained the situation, Raymond fell silent. "You're telling me Sergeant Hayes is living on the streets? The man who earned 2 Bronze Stars? That's not possible." Raymond immediately activated his military network. Within days, he had located a dozen veterans who had served with Leonard. Each had similar stories. Leonard always put his men first, shared his rations with younger soldiers, and volunteered for the most dangerous missions. Retired Corporal Marcus Johnson recalled how Leonard carried him and another wounded soldier for 5 kilometers in Iraq. Former Sergeant David Chen told how Leonard used his own vest to shield a wounded comrade in Fallujah. And all of them had the same question. How had the system failed him so completely? Leonard remained in pretrial detention, waiting for his new hearing. Ethan ensured he received proper medical care and regular meals. For the first time in years, Leonard was clean, properly medicated for diabetes, and beginning to look like the soldier he once was. Sarah visited him regularly, preparing his defense. She discovered that he had never lost his military identity. Even on the streets, he kept a disciplined routine, woke up early, and organized his belongings meticulously. He simply didn't know how to navigate the maze of bureaucracy that had swallowed his life whole. "I tried, counselor," Leonard told her. "For 2 years, I kept trying to explain what happened. But every person told me someone else could help. Eventually, I just gave up." "Well, we're not giving up," Sarah replied. "And you're not alone anymore." Sarah's investigation and Raymond's mobilization were building into a perfect storm. Documents were being uncovered, witnesses located, and the real story of Leonard Hayes was finally coming to light. What had started as a simple theft charge was turning into something far bigger, an indictment of a system that had failed a hero. The next hearing was set for the following week. The entire veteran community was rallying together. Leonard would no longer stand alone in that courtroom. His brothers in arms would be right there beside him, ready to testify about the man they knew, a hero who deserved far better. The morning of the new hearing transformed the Bronx courthouse into something no one had ever seen before. Lines of uniformed veterans stretched down the sidewalk, men and women who had traveled from different states to stand with Leonard Hayes. Some wore crisp dress uniforms, others donned faded military jackets. But every single one of them carried the same unshakable resolve. Colonel Raymond Stokes had arrived from Washington the night before, bringing with him documents and medals that told the real story of Leonard Hayes. Standing beside him was retired General Michael Torres, former battalion commander, who had canceled important commitments just to be there. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with intensity. Local journalists packed the back benches. The story had broken online, and in the last 24 hours, justice for Leonard was trending across the country. Leonard walked in under escort, but something had changed. Sarah Martinez had arranged for him to wear a clean military uniform, loaned to him by another veteran. As Leonard looked around the courtroom, packed with his brothers and sisters in arms, his legs nearly gave out. Tears rolled silently down his face. "Look at them, Sergeant," Sarah whispered. "They came here for you." Judge Ethan Morley entered the courtroom, visibly moved. He had spent the week combing through every document Sarah had uncovered. What he learned left him furious at the system, and more determined than ever to see justice done. "This court is now in session," Ethan declared. "Today, we are not merely addressing a theft charge. We are examining how our society treats those who gave everything for us." Sarah stood for the opening statement. "Your Honor, Leonard Hayes is not a criminal. He is an American hero abandoned by the very system that swore to protect him. Today, that truth will finally be heard." The first to testify was Raymond Stokes. In full uniform, standing tall and composed, he stepped up to the witness stand with flawless military posture. "Your Honor, I served under Sergeant Hayes in Iraq. This man is the very definition of military honor. Raymond spoke about Fallujah, where Leonard had voluntarily entered a burning building to rescue Iraqi civilians, including a young child. He didn't have to do it. It wasn't part of the mission. But Leonard Hayes has never seen a life that wasn't worth saving. Next came Marcus Johnson, now in a wheelchair due to combat injuries. Sergeant Hayes carried me for over 3 miles after I was hit. He was wounded too, bleeding bad, but he refused to leave me behind. If not for him, I wouldn't be alive. Each testimony painted the same picture. Leonard Hayes had repeatedly put the lives of others ahead of his own, without hesitation, without second thought. Then came General Torres, and his words hit like thunder. In my 40-year military career, I've met few men with the integrity of Sergeant Hayes. He earned 2 Bronze Stars for acts of repeated, extraordinary heroism. Finally, it was Leonard's turn to speak. A reverent silence swept the room. He stood slowly, leaning on the table for balance. "Your Honor," Leonard began, his voice rough but steady, "I was wrong to steal that sandwich. There's no excuse, and I accept responsibility. But I want everyone to know, I've never regretted serving this country." He paused, swallowing hard. "When I was on the streets, cold and starving, I sometimes wondered if it was worth it, if our sacrifices really meant anything. But looking around this courtroom today, seeing my brothers here, I know it was." Leonard turned to Ethan. "Doc Morley, the truth is I got lost after Margaret died. She was my compass, and when I lost her, I didn't know which way to go. The system beat me because inside I was already broken. The emotion in the room was overwhelming. Veterans wept openly. Even seasoned journalists were visibly shaken. Sarah presented the full documentation. Records of terminated benefits, dozens of unanswered calls to the VA, and the one lost letter that had triggered it all. She showed exactly how the system had failed a decorated hero. "Your Honor," Sarah said in closing, "Leonard Hayes should not be here as a defendant. He should be standing in front of a grateful nation, being honored. If there's a crime here, it's the crime of a system that abandoned the very people it was built to protect." The prosecutor, clearly unprepared for anything beyond a simple shoplifting case, looked increasingly uncomfortable. After a long pause, he did something rare. "Your Honor," he said, "in light of the evidence and the extraordinary circumstances, the state withdraws all charges against Mr. Hayes." A thunderous roar filled the courtroom. Veterans rose to their feet in ovation, shouting "Hurrah!" and "Semper Fi!" Leonard broke down in tears, unable to believe the nightmare had finally ended. Judge Morley banged his gavel to restore order, but he too was fighting back tears. "Leonard James Hayes," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for deeply personal reasons, I'm recusing myself from this case. But before I do, I want to say this publicly. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for your service. And I offer my deepest apology on behalf of a system that failed you." When the handcuffs were removed for the last time, Leonard was immediately surrounded by his fellow veterans. Men who hadn't seen each other in decades embraced, cried together, and celebrated, not just Leonard's freedom, but the recognition of who he truly was. The story would dominate national headlines that evening, but for Leonard Hayes, the moment that mattered most came when General Torres stepped forward and said, "Sergeant, it's time to take you home." 3 weeks after the trial that changed his life, Leonard Hayes sat in a comfortable chair at the Manhattan Veterans Rehabilitation Center, surrounded by familiar faces that now felt like an extended family. The days following the courtroom victory had been a whirlwind of emotions, resolved bureaucracy, and above all, brotherly love. General Torres had kept his word. Within 48 hours of the hearing, Leonard was placed in temporary housing funded by the Veterans Foundation, with all of his benefits fully restored retroactively. The VA, embarrassed by the national spotlight on the case, had assigned him a personal case officer to ensure he would never fall through the cracks again. But what truly transformed Leonard wasn't the benefits or the apartment. It was the sense of belonging he had lost so many years ago. Veterans from across the country had reached out, offering support, friendship, and their own stories of survival. Leonard realized he wasn't alone in his struggle. There was a quiet brotherhood that had always been there, waiting to welcome him home. Sarah Martinez had become more than just his attorney. She was now a dear friend, visiting him regularly and helping him adjust to his new life. Ethan Morley, the judge who had once been the young medic whose life Leonard saved, had become a close confidant. The two now shared frequent dinners, finally building the friendship that war had once interrupted. On that particular morning at the rehab center, something special was about to happen. Leonard had been invited to what was described as a routine meeting with a few fellow veterans, but the secretive looks on his friends' faces hinted that something much bigger was in store. When the doors to the hall opened, Leonard was struck speechless. More than 50 veterans had gathered, some he had served with, others who became friends after the trial, and many he had never met but who had been moved by his story. At the center of the room, draped in an American flag, stood something that made Leonard's heart skip a beat. Colonel Raymond Stokes stepped forward, dressed in full uniform as he had been on the day of the trial, but this time wearing a proud and radiant smile. "Sergeant Leonard Hayes," he said, his voice echoing through the hushed hall. "For over a decade, you walked this world carrying the weight of sacrifices we all made. Today, we want to help you walk again, with the dignity you've always deserved." At his signal, 2 veterans carefully lifted the flag, revealing what lay beneath. A state-of-the-art prosthetic leg, not just functional, but a marvel of modern medical engineering. Built with aerospace-grade materials, it integrated cutting-edge technology designed to allow Leonard not only to walk, but to run, climb stairs, and regain the mobility he had lost so long ago. "This prosthetic was built specifically for you," explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the specialist who led the project. "We used advanced military-grade technology, the same we're developing for active-duty soldiers injured in combat. It adapts to your movement, learns your patterns, and responds like a natural extension of your body." Leonard looked at the prosthetic through tears he couldn't hold back. They weren't just tears of gratitude. They were tears of relief, of finally feeling seen, remembered, and loved by those who truly understood his sacrifice. "You didn't have to do this," Leonard whispered, his voice cracking. "Yes, we did," said Marcus Johnson, rolling forward in his wheelchair. "You carried each of us when we needed it. Now it's our turn to carry you." The fitting of the prosthetic was ceremonial. Every veteran present had contributed, some financially, others with technical skills, and many simply with emotional support throughout the process. It was a true collective effort, a community taking care of one of its own. Once the prosthetic was adjusted and calibrated, Leonard prepared to take his first steps. Harder, Walsh guided him gently, explaining how the technology would respond to his body. But Leonard, ever the disciplined soldier, quickly adapted to the basic controls. His first step was cautious, the second, more confident. By the third, Leonard smiled, a real, honest smile, the kind no one had seen on his face in years. And then, he walked. Each step drew louder applause. Veterans who had faced battlefields and impossible odds wiped away tears as they watched their brother regain not only his mobility, but his dignity. Leonard made his way to the center of the room, then turned to face the crowd watching him with pride and affection. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever," he said, his voice now strong and clear. "Not just the ability to walk, but the faith that there's still goodness in this world." He paused, making eye contact with as many in the room as he could. "When I was on the streets, I thought I'd been forgotten, that my years of service didn't matter. But you've shown me something powerful. A soldier is never truly forgotten. We are a family, and families don't leave each other behind." General Torres stepped forward, and in a moment that would be captured by every camera in the room and go viral within hours, he embraced Leonard tightly. "Welcome home, Sergeant," he whispered. "Welcome back to life." What happened next was spontaneous, yet deeply moving. Every veteran in the room, those who could, stood and raised a silent salute to Leonard. It wasn't just military protocol. It was a solemn recognition of a man who had given everything for others and was finally receiving the honor he deserved. Leonard, tears streaming down his cheeks, returned the salute. In that moment, he was no longer the broken man who once stole a sandwich in desperation. He was once again Sergeant Leonard Hayes, hero, protector, brother. Months later, Leonard became a passionate advocate for veterans' rights, working alongside Sarah Martinez to reform the very system that nearly destroyed him. His story sparked legislative change to ensure no other veteran would be lost to the cracks of bureaucracy again. Ethan Morley continued serving as a judge, now with a transformed view of justice and compassion. He often referenced Leonard's case in his rulings, a reminder that behind every case file lies a human story worth hearing. And Leonard? Leonard had found his new mission. Every day he walked, literally and figuratively, alongside other veterans fighting their own battles. He had learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't avoiding the fall, but helping others rise again. The hero who was once forgotten now made sure no other hero was left behind. If this story touched your heart, give it a like so more people can discover the incredible journey of Leonard Hayes. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring story. And in the comments, tell us about a forgotten hero you know. Their story might be the next one we share. And don't go anywhere, because the next powerful story is already on your screen, and you won't want to miss it.